The first thing I saw wasn't his face. It was the taser pointed straight at my chest. The second thing I noticed was his finger already curled near the trigger like he'd been waiting all day for a reason. And the third thing was the look in his eyes that said he'd already decided who I was before I even opened my mouth. I was sitting on a park bench minding my business, my partner beside me, a black bag resting between us. Nothing dramatic, nothing loud, just another quiet afternoon in the city, birds somewhere in the trees, kids laughing in the distance, and then suddenly this officer steps in front of us like he's the final boss in a video game and says, "Hand me the bag." No greeting, no explanation, no badge flash, just that tone sharp and certain like the verdict had already been signed. I looked up at him and said, calm as I could, "You got a reason?" He didn't answer, just shifted his stance and lifted the taser a little higher like the question itself annoyed him. Behind him there was a sign literally saying the bench was public seating, no permit required. And I remember thinking, man, even the sign is on our side today and he still doesn't care. He still stands there breathing heavy through his nose like we're the problem he came to solve. My partner leaned slightly toward me and muttered, "Here we go, the way you say it when you've seen this movie before and you already know the ending." And yeah, I knew it too, because if you've lived long enough getting judged before you speak, you recognize that posture instantly, that stiff authority stance mixed with suspicion, like he was daring us to exist wrong. He asked again, louder this time, "What's in the bag?" I said nothing, because silence can be louder than arguing, and my partner answered, instead voice steady, "We're just sitting here." That should have ended it, right? But he tilted his head and said, "A park bench isn't your living room." And I swear for a second I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so ridiculous it felt scripted, like somebody handed him a line from a bad cop show and told him to try it out in real life. The thing is, we hadn't done anything except sit there, that's it. That was our big crime sitting. About half an hour earlier, we'd walked into that park looking like any two regular guys killing time, hoodies, sneakers, nothing flashy, the kind of people you'd pass on the sidewalk and forget immediately, and we picked that bench because it gave us a clear view of both entrances, which mattered for reasons he didn't know yet. We were waiting for someone, and if you've never done surveillance work, you might think it's exciting, but most of it is just patience. Long stretches of stillness, watching, listening, pretending you're part of the scenery, you know what I mean? The drop was late. 10 minutes past the window. My partner checked his watch. I scanned the walkway. Then finally a man came from the west. Gate walked straight toward us. Didn't glance around, didn't say a word, just placed the bag in my hand and kept walking like he'd never seen us before. Whole exchange maybe 8 seconds. No handshake, no whisper, nothing dramatic. I set the bag down between us and we went right back to sitting like we'd been doing all along, because that's what you do when you don't want attention. Apparently, Officer Tyler Grant had been watching from his patrol car across the lot for 15 minutes with the engine off like he was filming a nature documentary about suspicious benches, and later we'd find out he was only 8 months into the job, already had complaints about stopping people without cause, but at that moment all we saw was a uniform walking toward us with purpose. He stopped right in front of us, planted his boots like he owned the ground and said, "Give me the bag." Not "can I see it," not "what's going on," just "give it." I looked at him and asked, "You got probable cause?" He ignored that eyes, locked on the zipper like it personally offended him. My partner said, "We didn't do anything wrong." Grant stepped closer, hand tightening around the taser grip thumb, brushing the safety click, that tiny sound cutting through the park noise like a snapped twig in a quiet forest. He repeated himself again louder, like volume could replace legality. "Hand it over." I raised my hand slightly, palms out, calm, steady. "We do not consent to a search," he shot back. "I don't need your consent." And right there was the moment I knew he believed he was right. Not legally right, just personally convinced. And that kind of confidence can be more dangerous than anger. He lifted the cuffs so they rattled metal clinking in the air and said, "Stand up." We stood slowly, me first, my partner. A beat later, the bag still on the bench between us like it was the third character in this scene. The taser stayed pointed at chest level, not lowered, not relaxed, just hovering there like punctuation. He still hadn't said what crime we'd committed, hadn't told us we were detained, hadn't explained anything. Just orders stacked on orders, and I could see sweat near his temple, even though it was a cool afternoon. Not fear of us exactly, more like fear of losing control of the story he'd already decided was true. "Pick it up," he said, nodding at the bag. I looked down at it, then back at him. "You said we're being detained." He didn't answer, just tightened his jaw. Behind him, I noticed a guy in a veteran cap holding his phone up, recording everything. Steady Hand's lens pointed right at us, and I remember thinking, good. Somebody else sees this too. Grant's voice sharpened. Don't make this difficult. My partner shifted his weight, but stayed calm, voice level. We're in a public park. Grant raised the cuffs slightly. Last chance. And that's when it happened, the moment everything tilted. I slowly reached into my jacket. His voice snapped, don't reach for anything. I paused just long enough for the tension to stretch tight, then pulled out my chain badge, catching the sunlight in a bright flash, and my partner did the same. Half a second later, 2 FBI shields glinting side by side. The taser lowered like gravity suddenly remembered it existed. Grant blinked once, twice, silent for 3 long seconds, then muttered, you should have said that. I held the badge against my chest and said, we're not required to. My partner slipped a small recorder from his coat, red light blinking, and added, everything that just happened is recorded. Yeah, that happened. Grant clipped the taser back onto his belt, real slow, glanced around and saw the man still filming, saw the park sign, saw reality closing in from all directions. You can go, he said flat. No apology, no explanation, just dismissal, like he was shooing away pigeons. I didn't move yet, just bent down, picked up the bag, and asked, we're not under arrest, right? He shook his head slightly, eyes dropping to the ground. We stepped sideways, creating space, not turning our backs until we were clear, because habits like that stick with you. 2 hours later, we were in our field office conference room. Door closed, recorder playing the whole encounter for our supervisor. Every word, crisp. The demand, the threat, the click of the taser, the line about not needing consent, and when it ended, he just asked, did he touch you? No. Did he have a warrant? Number. He nodded, wrote it down, facts first, feelings later. And by that afternoon, Internal Affairs had a case open, body cam footage, secured paperwork moving through channels like dominoes lined up. Next morning, Grant was on administrative leave. 1 week later, termination notice. 3 weeks later, certification revoked, and the file didn't stop there. Civil rights review. Federal record. Our lawsuit naming him in the city. Nearly 1 million requested. Settlement came in at $950,000, with conditions attached. Mandatory bias training, independent oversight board. Written justification for every stop, quarterly body cam audits. And during that review, they flagged 5 other officers with similar patterns. 2 fired, 3 reassigned, all from one afternoon. 1 bench, 1 recording. Meanwhile, the investigation we'd actually been working that day wrapped 2 weeks later with 11 arrests. Federal warrants served, the documents in that same black bag used as evidence in court. Real criminals taken off the street, while the officer who tried to arrest us couldn't keep a security job because background checks told his story before he could. 5 years later, that oversight board is still active. Reports, public complaints reviewed on deadlines, policies rewritten, because one man thought suspicion was the same thing as proof. And what sticks with me most isn't the settlement or the headlines. It's that moment his expression changed when realization hit him that the situation wasn't what he assumed, that the narrative he'd built in his head collapsed all at once like a mirror, suddenly showing him exactly what he'd been doing. Sitting on a bench isn't a crime, holding a bag isn't evidence, and authority doesn't replace the law, no matter how confident someone sounds saying it. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if nobody had been recording, if that bystander hadn't held up his phone, if we hadn't documented every second. Would anything have happened at all, or would it have just been another story nobody believed? So, I want to ask you something honestly, and I want you to answer in the comments. Do you think that officer was just inexperienced, or was it something deeper, something people don't like to talk about? And if you'd been sitting where I was that day, same bench, same bag, same silence, do you think the outcome would have been the same? Tell me what you think, because stories like this don't end when they're told, they end when people decide what they mean.